Today we're doing a comparison of direct sowing and transplanting. Let's go. Hey friends, it's Kendall, your joyful farmer, back in the high tunnel today to show you a direct comparison of direct sown seeds versus seeds that I started indoors and transplanted out. I'm also going to walk you through some information that will hopefully help you decide whether you want to direct sow, transplant, or maybe try both. This year I got some giant dahlia seeds from Johnny's, and I decided I would try growing them two different ways. I started some of the seeds in a 72 cell plug tray, and others I direct sowed out here directly into the soil in the greenhouse. The ones that I started in the tray, I started about a week sooner than I direct sowed out here. So the transplanted plants are about a week older than the direct sown ones. With the direct sown dahlias, I spaced them about 9 inches apart. I grew 2 seeds in each space just to ensure that I got good germination on them. I did go in and thin them out so that there's just 1 plant per 9-inch spacing, and I thinned them out and I put the smaller ones on the ends just to fill in the row. I planted out the transplants when they were about 4 weeks old, but I have definitely noticed some differences between the 2 sets of dahlias. So this first half of dahlias is the direct sown dahlias. I've noticed that the plants, since they've been growing, are shorter, stockier, they're bushier, and overall they seem to be thriving and growing a little bit more quickly than the transplants. The transplants look great, don't get me wrong, but they are a little bit thinner, they're a little taller, and just a little more spindly than the direct sown plants. So let's get in there and I'll show you how the plants are looking now that they're about 6 to 7 weeks old. So these are the dahlias that I grew direct sown up until just about this point. You can see that they're very bushy plants, their foliage is very full, and they're pretty nice, dense green plants. And then if we move down to this side, these are the ones that I transplanted. They're varying sizes. Some are a lot smaller than others, but most of them are a little bit taller and a little less bushy and full compared to the direct sown plants. Now these plants are about a week older, and I am noticing that they are developing some buds, so they will be blooming here pretty soon. A handful of the dahlias are quite a bit taller, probably 4 or 5 inches taller than the tallest of the direct sown plants, but you can tell that they have no real branching going on near the base. They're developing really nice stems, but the plants just don't look quite as full. This one's got a little bit more branching here at the base, and it's a nice tall plant, and it's got some bud that it's developing. But wow, when you compare that to the dahlias that are direct sown, you can see the bases of them are just a little stockier, they're a little shorter, and they're developing all sorts of nice branching near the base. My sidekick was meowing at the door. Now, I did not pinch any of these dahlia plants just so that I would have a uniform comparison of the two. And really, the high tunnel has been a game changer for me this year, in that I've been able to start seeds earlier, and the soil has been a lot warmer in here than it has been outside. So I've gotten a really good head start on direct sowing some things. But I really do prefer the direct sown plants just because of their vigor and how full they are. I'm wondering which are going to produce more blooms. They may end up producing the exact same in the end, but hopefully I'll have some staggered bloom times just because of the staggered plant times. And of course I'll keep them cut so they will continue to produce blooms throughout the late spring and early summer. Direct sowing is such a time saver. It really does save this step of starting seeds in a greenhouse or indoors and having to harden them off and transplant them. It just is so easy to put a seed in the ground and water it. Some of the issues that you come across with direct sowing are that animals can eat the seeds or the baby seedlings as they are planted in the ground and they start to germinate. I've had an issue with pill bugs this year being all over the high tunnel garden and the big garden as well, and eating my baby seedlings. So I've been dealing with that this year with the direct sown seeds. Also, when you direct sow, there's more temperature fluctuation, so the germination rates aren't always quite as high as if you have a controlled climate indoors or in a greenhouse. But transplants, no matter how carefully you transplant them, are always going to endure some sort of transplant shock. They're going from a soilless medium where it's been nice and fluffy and they've been adapted to a kind of easy life to some soil that's in ground or in a raised bed that's got a different composition to it. The roots have to oftentimes work a little bit harder to get established, and they have to adapt and figure out a new way of processing nutrients and growing the plant and getting it to thrive. It's pretty much always going to slow the plant growth down. So I've often found that direct sown plants and plants that volunteer in the garden are more vigorous just because they start their life outdoors in the sun and adapted to the soil and climate conditions. Whereas transplants always endure a little bit of stress when you transplant them out. As far as flowers and bloom time, I find that transplants do tend to bloom at the same time that they normally would be expected to as far as their days to maturity goes. But I've also found that in many cases, the direct sown plants can catch up to the transplants and bloom pretty much at the same time that they do. Look, you got cat hair all over me. Love that. So overall, if you're choosing to direct sow or transplant, you've got to think about your conditions. You've got to think about the hazards that the direct sown seeds are going to endure, whether it be animals, insects, or temperatures that they're having to deal with outside. But when you're transplanting plants out, a lot of times you're skipping the most vulnerable stage that the plant is going through, and you're getting it to a point where it's more likely to survive in the garden. It's also really important to note that different seeds have different preferences for germination, and some struggle more than others with having their roots disturbed by transplanting. If you aren't sure, my recommendation is to try it both ways. Trial and error is really the best way to learn what works for you and your soil, climate, and situation. I'll also link a video below where I share my favorite methods for starting certain varieties of seeds. So we will compare how these dahlias bloom. We should start to see some blooms here in a couple of weeks, and I'll keep you posted. And just for comparison, this year I did get some tubers that I decided to plant in a separate part of the high tunnel this year. I did not wake them up early. I planted them directly out here in the soil, and I planted these about 2 weeks after I direct sowed the others. So you can see that many of them have sprouted at this point. Some of them have multiple shoots coming up, others have just one. So I'll do another little comparison of the bloom rates for these that I'm growing from tubers versus the ones that are first year plants that I've grown from seed. And whether you're starting seeds indoors or you're going to transplant some out into the garden, I wish you joy on your journey, and I will see you next time.